panel, and the students have been reading assigned books. So Ellyn Dunford selected books that's going to start the conversation. But I need y'all to do something with me. Let me make sure I've got the high sign. Okay, we're going to clap in 100 of the student-to-student kids, and they're going to sit right here. So let's clap them in. Keep clapping. Still coming. Student to student. See all the... Sit down. Come on down. You can sit over here too. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. Come on, y'all. Come on down. Sit where you can see. Squeeze in over here. Around over here. Come around. Come on down. You've almost got the end of the caboose. Okay. I'm not sure what the collective for a whole bunch of S2S kids is, but there are 33 high schools represented. Thank you to the 45 sponsors that are here. And we have 1,000 schools with student to student, by the way, 1,000 elementary, middle, and high school students. So these represent their high schools. So this is so cool. We have the chairman of the Joint Chief, General Dunford, is here, and he is the chairman, as I said, of our nation and our nation's highest-ranking military officer. He is the principal military advisor to the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council. Ellyn Dunford, you're going to hear their accents. They're not from Texas. They're from Boston, not Austin. Boston, not Austin. Okay. Bless their hearts, right? Anyway. So Ellyn is also a Boston native. She's a graduate of Simmons College. She is a physical therapist, and she moved to Northern Virginia where she met her husband. And they've been married for over 30 years. They've had 18 moves in 6 states. And have parented 3 children, and they've weathered numerous deployments. Now, the assignment was to read, as I said, Ellyn Dunford selected the books. So all of the students have read, in the summer now, they read one of the books that was selected. And these really reflect our nation's history. So we have Ladies of Liberty is one of the books, and I want to show you the books there. These are really good. Ladies of Liberty, and you know, Cokie Roberts has done an outstanding job. Another good book is Founding Mothers that she wrote. Then the book about Martha Washington, her biography. And then a really interesting book by Gawande, Dr. Gawande, called Better. And you may have read the Checklist Manifesto. So they all read one of the books. So that's sort of the conversation starters. So now it's my deep privilege and honor to bring out General Dunford and Ellyn Dunford and they're going to join us right now. So.
Thanks. Hey, good morning, everyone. I was gonna start by saying some nice things about Dr. Keller, but after that introduction, I'm not sure I'm going to do that now.
Bless your
and I
heart.
guess I do talk funny if you're from Texas. But on a serious note, when Ellyn and I got the invitation to come here this morning, we immediately said yes for a couple of reasons. And one is our admiration for Dr. Keller, one of the founders in the last 20 years. And I told her when I saw her this morning that that's one of those invitations, you know right away you're going to support somebody who's done so much for our military families over the years. And fortunately, she's going to be with us for another year. But Dr. Keller, thanks for all you do. The second reason that Ellyn and I felt so strongly about coming here today was just to say thanks to MSEC, and from two perspectives, really. One of them is as parents. As Dr. Keller said, we raised our three children who are now 30, 28, and 27, all off out of the house doing their own thing now. But we raised our children in a military lifestyle, and I was telling some of the panelists earlier, we remember clearly moving, for example, our daughter from California after 8th grade to start high school in Virginia. I remember those first few days when she came home and she was sitting by herself at lunch and absolutely miserable because all her friends were in California. And there wasn't the student-to-student program in those days, but not by coincidence, a young girl whose dad was in the Army on about the third day went over there and introduced herself, and right away Kathleen was able to get integrated to the school. And so we feel pretty strongly about the student-to-student program and what you all do. You all been on the other end, so you understand exactly what it means to have a friendly face and somebody come over and kind of talk you through that. But I think as parents, there's two things you really are focused on in a military family. One is obviously the health of your children, and the other is the education. If I had to pick priority one and priority two, it'd be those two. And MSEC has done so much, because one of the other stories that we're mindful of is, I remember when our son, who did 3 years of high school in California, moved to Virginia, and the indignity of his life was that he had to take Virginia history with all the freshmen after moving from California to Virginia. That was a major family crisis at the time, but we know that the transitions are easier now as a result of all that MSEC has done. But probably just as importantly, what I would say is sitting where I sit now and looking at the men and women. One of the great things about our current assignment is Ellyn and I have spent now almost 3 years visiting virtually every part of the Joint Force. Mm-hmm. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, all over the world doing great things, and their families. And we're always amazed at the quality of young men and women that we are recruiting, and the quality of young men and women that we are retaining. And particularly after 17 years of war and the sacrifices we've asked our families to go through, I don't take that for granted. And one of the reasons why our men and women can make the choice to actually join the military and to decide to stay in the case of those that choose to make it as a career, is because they know that it's not mutually exclusive to raise a family, to have well-balanced children, to provide a great education for your children, and also to serve. And MSEC has done so much to make sure that is possible as well. So it's great to be with you today. The most important thing will be the panel. But I do want to, before asking Ellyn to make a few comments, just talk to the students that are sitting down here in the front row. You know, one of the things, the themes of the books are all about sacrifice. They're all about leadership. They're all about looking out for other people. And that's probably something I don't even need to talk to you all about, because you've already demonstrated as young people the willingness to look out for other people and stand up and say, hey, I want to make sure that somebody else who's gone through the same experience that I've gone through has an easier time. So I want to say thanks for what you're doing to all the other kids who benefit from your leadership, from your mentorship, and sometimes just from putting your arm around them and say, hey, you know what, it's going to be okay. This is a tough transition, but I'm going to help you through it. So thanks for what you do as well.
And I wanted to say that, one of the things that's so important and beneficial about conferences and having panels is that it gives the listeners the opportunity to explore their own views on those subjects and figure out their own understanding of what's being discussed on the panel. And then to decide a course of action. Even a course of action is sometimes doing nothing, but more often it's figuring out what I am going to do. And so hopefully when you listen to the discussion, it'll help you as leaders, as educators, as students, sort of figure out what is the path that I'm going to take after attending this conference. It's no secret that the military community has always grown better citizens for this country, whether it's the service member or the family member that comes from that service. Because we're more likely to live off base than we are to live on base. We're already a part of the community. It's not like military's here, civilians are here. And so this just further enmeshes our understanding and our commitment to help make sure that we're all building better citizens, whether you're military connected or not. And this is going to help the community. So thanks, and I'm looking forward to our questions.
So hi everyone, my name is Matt Posey. I'm from Randolph High School in San Antonio, Texas. So I'd first like to thank General and Mrs. Dunford for allowing us to join in this session. It's such an honor to be invited to read these books that you guys have suggested. We have all read one of the books, and I read Ladies of Liberty by Cokie Roberts. And I think this was really great. I kind of interpreted it as like a behind the scenes of the first few years of America, and not just on like the social life of the first family, but also behind the politics and the history. And so my first question is, what inspired you to choose these books? Why were you drawn to them?
So first off, I've really been fascinated by Mount Vernon and the history there. We've lived near it many times. But then I saw this book about Martha Washington and read it, and it really was an amazing introduction into this tiny little woman who so much of what she did was not within the normal expectations of a woman of her era. She was widowed very young. She took over her husband's business and ran it successfully she was widowed in her 20s, and she lost her husband, she lost 2 of her children, and certainly didn't fall apart. She kind of pulled herself up by her bootstraps, ran the company, met George Washington, and during that era, when you married someone, the woman's money went to the new husband. He had control of her purse strings. So
that sounds like a pretty good deal. What do you think?
So, first of all, she made a very good choice in a husband, but she was an equal partner to him, and when he was gone during the era of the Revolutionary War, she ran Mount Vernon with a foreman, not something that your average woman would have done. And then as you read the book, you find out that she really set forth the example of what to do as the first commander-in-chief's spouse, and then as the first president's spouse. So right there, that was a no-brainer. And then the Ladies of Liberty carries on kind of this very unusual circumstance of people with, a brand new job title. I mean, we had a king and a queen. What did we know about having a president and a first lady? And sort of set that role and set an example for the citizens of this country in how to be good citizens. And then for Dr. Gwande, he has a really unique way of problem solving and looking at the world. And his perspective may be from a medical perspective, but it's not only medicine. It could be used by anybody in any business. So I thought that would be a great title to spur our students on to think about things in a different vein and to accept information and process it differently.
Hey, if I could, Matt, just on the book Better in particular, how many people have read that book? Not very many. Somebody back there. This is the reason why Ellyn and I were introduced to the book. Our daughter worked at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and that's where this doctor was when he wrote the book. And she had told us about hearing the doctor speak, and then gave us a copy of the book. And it's not very thick. It's probably about 150 pages or so. It's a very easy read. But don't be deceived by who wrote it or what the theme is inside of it, as we'll probably get into here in a minute. I would say to the educators that are here, it's a great book to assign juniors, seniors in high school, because it helps you think about problem solving. And actually, I think there's a strong strain of leadership in the book as well. I mean, I found it fascinating. And when we get into a little bit of some of the examples of the problems that are highlighted by the doctor, what it really is all about is what the title says. It's about making the organization that you're a part of better. That's what the title of the book. And this doctor has some really, I think, excellent reflections on what has made organizations improve, what are the characteristics of leaders that help organizations improve, and I think most of the folks here would find that a pretty enjoyable read. And I know we're gonna hear from some of the folks that actually read it, so that's good.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Keegan Huang. I'm a senior at Falcon High School in Colorado. There it is.
Colorado people.
I read the book Martha Washington. In the book, Martha Washington made a lot of sacrifices for General George Washington and our country. And one that really stuck out to me was during the Revolutionary War. George Washington was stationed at many encampments, and Martha Washington traveled to all those encampments to support him. She was really the heart and devotion of the Revolutionary War to back up George Washington. Thought that was pretty cool. So my question to General Dunford and Mrs. Dunford, what have you learned about sacrifice, and what can you tell us about it?
First of all, I was raised in a family of volunteers, whether it was the Red Cross, scouting, church events, school events. Everyone in my family volunteered. So that was just sort of what you did. And there weren't a lot of the organizations that exist today to fill social needs or educational needs. So I think the best way to learn is to be aware of what's going on around you, and using Mr. Rogers' term, look for the helpers. You know, find the people that are doing things. Who makes the world better? Who makes your community better? And look for the example that they set. I've been really lucky that I've always had military neighbors, civilian neighbors, co-workers, etc., who have given to me of their own time, their own resources, without expecting any reimbursement for what they've done for me. And I think that really is the description of sacrifice. When you give from yourself, whether it's your time, your talents, your money, your energy, and you don't expect anything back for it. You do it purely for the goodness of helping someone else, and that really is sacrifice. And so when it comes to our service members, they may be giving their lives, and I think that's not lost on many of the families here who have served. So I think that's really where you learn about what sacrifice is, as you watch the people around you.
Yeah, I think, you know, when you think about the military, and I think this applies to educators as well, one of the most rewarding parts of serving in uniform, or I think being part of the education profession, is you're part of something that's greater than yourself. And I can tell you, reflecting back now from my years in uniform, individual accomplishments are nowhere near as satisfying as when you're part of an organization that accomplishes something. You know, that could be you're in a play, you're in a band, you're on a sports team, whatever the case may be. When the organization accomplishes something, and you have, by definition, given of your time and energy for a greater good than yourself, it's actually, I think, the most rewarding thing in life. And to me, you know, what I've learned about sacrifice is for the team to do well, individuals have to, by definition, make sacrifices to make the team do well. And even when you think about families, I look at Ellyn and I over the years, and to be good parents, what do you have to do? You got to put the needs of your family ahead of your own. To be a good leader, you got to put the needs of your subordinates ahead of your own. To be a good teammate, you got to put the needs of the team ahead of your own. And to me, you can't be a good parent, you can't be a good educator, you can't be a good leader, you can't be a good member of the team unless you're willing to make, by definition, unless you're willing to make sacrifice. So I think that'll be one of the themes, and I think that's why we probably selected the readings that we did, because what you see is, in these books, you see the accomplishments of people, extraordinary accomplishments that we'll talk about. And the reason why they accomplished something is not because necessarily of what they did just as individuals, but what they did for the greater good by sacrificing some of their own personal time and energy, and in some cases, Ellyn said, for certain members of the U.S. military. The freedom that we have today is because others were willing to sacrifice their very lives to give us that freedom.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Isabel Cordy. I am a senior at James Clemens High School, and I am from Madison, Alabama. So I, too, read the book Ladies of Liberty by Cokie Roberts, which I found as a fantastic read. Thank you for having it. And one thing that really stood out to me was I just learned personally so much from Abigail Adams and Dolly Madison, and even people who were briefly covered like Isabella Graham. And one thing I feel like today is that that's not covered enough in our history textbooks within school. So one question that I would like to ask you is, since I believe we can learn so much from these people, what is some advice you can give to us about learning from past stories and experiences and how to make a positive impact within our world?
Do you want me to start?
Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, you know, that expression, why would you reinvent the wheel? It makes so much sense to look back at what people who have come before you have done, so you don't repeat the same mistakes, so you don't waste time, money, energy, the whole works. And secondly, you know, that expression, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. People who believe they have all the answers often find out that they don't. And sometimes it's not a good thing. So I really believe that reading the biographies of people, understanding what was going on at that time, why did they make the decisions that they made, are terribly important. And then I love living history. I mean, I love visiting Mount Vernon, especially when they have the colonial days. We've taken our kids to see Gettysburg, to Jamestown. We grew up in Boston and walked the Freedom Trail. You walk past these pieces of history here in Washington, D.C. all the time. But what's the story behind them? Why are they important? And I think that what you really realize is that history is not neat and clean. It's very messy because people are messy. People's lives are messy. And those are the things that make history real to us. You have, you know, the figures of the first ladies, and you find out that it all wasn't, you know, roses for them, that things were challenging and people were challenging. So you learn that what it's really about is being our best during a time of need. So reading about history and other experiences, visiting those places to give you a better sense, and then imagining what would you have done in these circumstances helps you to then, in the future, meet whatever challenges you're going to meet.
I would also say that history gives you great context, and I know for me in my current assignment, understanding history is critical. And I'll just give an example. We just came from 2 days of meeting with our Australian friends. Once a year, we meet with the foreign minister, the minister of defense, and the chief of defense for Australia, and we talk about our mutual interests, our economic interests, our political interests, our security interests in the Pacific, and we talk about solutions to problems. And just this week, as we talked about solving problems in the Pacific, one of the things we had to talk about was the history that causes nations in the Pacific to interact in the way they do. And it actually helps inform the solutions that you might develop in a certain region. You know, without mentioning the specific countries, we want to do things together. We call that multilateral or collective responses to challenges. And sometimes what we want to do as the United States, because the strength of our nation is the allies and partners we have around the world, sometimes we want to bring the people together in a collective way to respond to a problem. But there's history between these countries, and you have to account for that. And sometimes they don't want to deal directly with each other. They want to deal with the United States, and you try to force them to do things, but you realize, no, there's actually history between these two countries, and you've got to accommodate that. The other thing I would say that I would commend to all of you is that you can really take for granted. Let's just talk about being an American citizen here for a minute. You can really take for granted what we have in our country today. And I can speak to with confidence. And, I mentioned one of the privileges we have is travel around the world and to represent you. And I can say with confidence, whether it be economically, whether it be politically, or whether it be from a security perspective, we do have something very special in this nation. And I think it's American exceptionalism. You've probably heard it referred to. And if you go back and you read history, you understand, for example, the books we read today, what our founding fathers had in mind when they talked about this country and what this country means in terms of the freedoms that we enjoy. And you understand the balance that they had envisioned between individual freedoms and then responsibility that we all have to maintain those individual freedoms, and the responsibility I have in my generation to make sure that we pass those same freedoms along to you. So Ellyn mentioned the expression, Winston Churchill said it, a famous professor at Harvard University said it, if you don't understand history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I don't think there's anybody, particularly those sitting in here, that wouldn't want to, at the end of their lives, be able to say that they made a positive change. And when you're going to make change, you need to understand how we got to where we are today and why we got to where we are today. And in that full context, then you can chart a course for how we might move forward tomorrow in a constructive way to actually make a big impact. But so many things about life are the ability to actually visualize. Anybody ever talk about visualization? Think about who's a baseball player. You have to visualize hitting the ball. Who's a golfer? You got to visualize hitting the golf ball properly. Who's somebody that's been in a play? You got to imagine yourself out there performing the role that you're performing. And if you can visualize yourself doing it, it's much easier to perform. And I would tell you that for me personally, studying history provides context and allows me to actually visualize what the solution to a particular problem may be, because very seldom have I come across something that is completely unfamiliar. It doesn't mean history repeats itself exactly, but there's patterns that are recognizable. There's things that you can learn. There's reasons people made decisions in the past and the way they thought. And then even how they interact with people, and all of that comes from history. And it's not about memorizing dates, right? It's not about memorizing dates. It's not about memorizing places. It's about understanding how, what, why. Those are the kinds of things you want to take away from reading history. And so that, again, is why two of the three books that we offer to the students here today are role models from history that actually I think are relevant to us all today.
We're good. Hello? Okay, sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Elias Furman, and I'm here with Robinson High School down from South Tampa Bay, Florida. And thank you. Just talking about what General Dunford said earlier on, I wanted to add on that. The book is, it's fantastic. And I have a quote that could sort of add on to what General Dunford says. And it really sums up that everything that Dr. Gawande is trying to say. He says, when you've tried several treatments and they fail, do you keep fighting or do you stop? Choices must be made, and no choice will always be right. But there are ways, however, to make our choices better. And I feel like that really sums up what he's trying to sort of elaborate on in the book. And my question for you is, how you guys have your strengths and weaknesses. How would you guys use your strengths to sort of inspire people to do what Mr. Gawande is trying to do and just make people be better and make things better?
Okay. I'm going to start that one. Go ahead. Okay. The first thing I would say is, I think if you want to make people better and you want your organization to be innovative, you want people to find out, to discover new ways of doing things better, as the title of the book says, is you got to unleash them to their own potential. And I always describe that as a leader as telling people what to do, not how to do it. How many of you like being told exactly how to do something? No, most of you don't. I mean, look, I raised 3 children. None of them wanted me to tell them how to do something, right? But what you really want to do is if you're a leader, and it doesn't matter if you're a student leader or you're a leader later in life, you're going to be surrounded by people that have certain talents. Everybody on a team is going to bring something unique to the team. And when you're a leader, what you want to really do is unleash that talent. And the best way to unleash that talent is make people feel like they're part of the solution and to incentivize them to make a contribution, try something different, to make the organization a bit different. I'm going to just use an example that came from the book that Elias read. And it's a medical example, but it's actually something that's pretty extraordinary. So for many, many years, infant mortality rate in the United States was very, very high. And people knew that one of the reasons that infant mortality was high in the United States was because of unsanitary conditions when the baby was born. And that was the most dangerous period of time in a baby's life, and people knew there were unsanitary conditions. And they knew years and years and years ago that if the doctors and the nurses and the medical attendants simply washed their hands, there would be a profound impact. There'd be a profound impact on infant mortality. And yet, despite people knowing that for decades, they didn't make real changes in a hospital. And although they would put signs up to wash your hands and so forth, people wouldn't do it. In the book, it talks about one of the places they solved the problem is the person looked at things a little bit differently, and they said, you know, telling people to wash their hands is not enough. We have to make washing hands a convenient thing to do. And they watched the patterns of people's behavior and so forth, and they decided to put something as simple as hand sanitizing stations and places to wash your hands in places where people would do it automatically. And one of the reasons, think about a big impact, one of the reasons that infant mortality in the United States was reduced significantly was that simple introduction into the medical profession of sanitary conditions when children are born. And again, that's about a medical example, but it's about somebody looking at a problem and having an initiative and taking that initiative that actually makes a big, big change in the organization. I think that was probably one of the better examples in the book, Elias.
Yeah. I found that to be quite silly, actually. You know, I'm sure everyone here washed their hands after they used the bathroom. I would hope so. But I mean, I'm reading this and I thought, why? Like, your doctors, they were sucking like particles out of the air that aren't supposed to be there when the babies are born, and then he goes, oh yeah, and the biggest problem was that no one was washing their hands. What? You're doctors. So it was profound that, or, you know, it was just confusing to me, but it was definitely interesting to see how him and the nurses sort of took the initiative, and they were very diligent with how they chose to go about solving the problem, and it was a very positive way of doing it. Instead of, you know, getting frustrated with people, they just took the initiative. They put hand sanitizer stations in convenience places, and I really, you know, like that section of the book. Yeah,
and Elias, I think you just said the important word is initiative. And if you want people to have initiative, you got to reward initiative. And again, you got to say, hey, this is the problem that we have. What's your idea of how to solve it? And if you're part of a team and you give the team the opportunity to use their own creativity, their own imagination, no matter how smart you are, I always tell people, you may be the smartest of 1,000 people in a room, but you will never be smarter than all 1,000 people, ever, right? And so it's about leveraging the talent that's on the team.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about, that same thing of nobody wants to be told exactly what you have to do. And when we got married in the 80s, there was a lot of change going on in the role of the military spouse. It was shifting from a period when pretty much hardly anybody worked once they got married or once they had children, and a lot of duty stations, it just was no expectation. You were going to volunteer, you're going to, you know, be around and all of that stuff. And I was sort of in on the change of, you know, the early phases of spouses really wanting to have careers, and I worked hard to get mine. I didn't want to lose it. And in our role in supporting the military was changing too. It was sort of, initially there was no guidance for how to be a family readiness kind of a person who just did it, and they were starting to formalize it. And I realized that this is a continuous change in the role of the spouse, who the spouse is, what they are available to do. And so when I travel around, I would ask military spouses 3 questions, because we wanted to build mentorship and sort of a feeling of owning the fact that you were responsible for your military community. So I'd ask people, have you ever been a mentor or had a mentor? If no, why not? Why have you never had a mentor? Why have you never mentored somebody else? And then the final question of what do you see as your role and responsibility in the different communities that you're a part of? Your neighborhood, your job, your church, your unit, your the greater command or the installation, your service, and the greater community. Where do you fit in? And then I would let people talk about it. So it would be a group of peers. And really what happened was the ability to have peers comment to each other and kind of provide an example of, well, if you say it's not your responsibility, then whose responsibility is it? It's much more valuable than if somebody like me comes in and says, well, don't you think it's your responsibility, when it came from a peer. And so among our students, among our professionals, the peer pressure in there to decide where do you fit in and what are you responsible for within your communities is much more valuable than someone from the outside kind of mandating that you have to do this.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna Javins. I go to Wiley High School in Abilene, Texas. And I also read Better. And one of the chapters that I found really intriguing was called The Bell Curve. And so Gawande depicts a type of bell curve where the surgeons that perform poorly are at the bottom, the foot of the curve, which luckily they are. And then it escalates to the hump of the bell curve where a large majority of surgeons are mediocre, which then de-escalates to the surgeons who are very high achievers. So my question for both of y'all is, has there been anyone in y'all's lifetime who inspired you to be high achievers?
I'll start. I mean, in my case, I was very lucky, and I suspect many of you, particularly students here, were fortunate, is my dad. My dad served 4 years as a Marine in the Korean War, came back to be a policeman. I'm the oldest of 6 sons. He was a policeman, he worked construction, he worked 2 jobs. And here's the kicker. He got his bachelor's degree the year after I did. And despite all of that, his GPA was higher than mine, and which was a bit embarrassing when you think about it, because although I had a job, my life was nowhere near as busy as he is, and his pursuit of excellence. And at that point, he was I think probably 48 years old when he got his degree, and he knew, because I was the oldest, he knew that all of his kids were coming up, and what he wanted to do as the leader of the family was set the bar. And he set it pretty high. And so he didn't want any excuses about you're not going to go to school and you're not going to do well or you're not going to get good grades, because then he wouldn't have to say anything, right? He wouldn't have to say anything. All he had to do was act. And so I was fortunate in that regard. And then I would also tell you, as a leader, one of the things that inspires me to high standards today is when you go around and you see the men and women that we're fortunate enough to be surrounded with, and we watch them doing what they're doing, I always return back to my job, digging down a little bit deeper to work just a little bit harder so you don't let them down. So there's actually 2 ways you can be inspired to excellence. One is looking up to people, as I've had the privilege of working for a lot of good people I've looked up to. Ellyn talked about mentorship. People have been mentors to me, starting with my dad. But also you can be inspired by the people around you and the people that you're fortunate enough to serve with as well. And I would tell you, sitting where I sit right now, I'm as likely to be inspired by the sergeants first class, the lance corporals, and the PFCs that we watch, or the young seaman that's on the bridge of an aircraft carrier, actually driving an aircraft carrier and doing the kinds of things that our young men and women do. I'm as likely to be inspired by them as I am by senior people.
And I have to say, I've always been really lucky when we've moved into different positions, whether when Joe was in command and sort of people are looking at you to do something or create some kind of an environment. I was always lucky that I had people before me who sort of passed down lessons learned. Some people will give you a turnover file or whatever, but mostly it's the insight that they pass on to you about how to support the people that are around you, how to make things better for the people who make sure that your service member can do their job. And somebody told me long ago, actually several people have told me, that you have often a very brief period of time in which you are influential within a community. So you're in a certain role, you're in a certain situation, and you have the opportunity to influence what's going on. You're not going to have that forever. So why would you, somebody said to me, why would you waste this chance to make a difference? Why would you not use your talents? And when they kind of put it that way, it's like, yeah, I guess why wouldn't I? I mean, you have things to offer. The other thing is that you will never know sometimes when you have positively impacted somebody else. And there are a lot of people who did kind things for me at various points in my life. And I never really saw them again or got the chance to tell them what an impact it had. I may not have even known that impact for quite a while. So you want to make sure that you are doing things that create a lasting influence on the people that you're in touch with. And you don't ever expect them to thank you for it. You just want to make sure that you're paying back for all of the things that have been done for you over the years. And so I'm not going to cite one specific person, but I would say there's been a lot of people who've shown me that example.
Thank you.
So we probably have time for one more question. And so
Make it an easy one, Matt.
I'm sorry.
Make it an easy one.
This one's a little difficult, actually.
A little tough, all right. All right.
So in the early stages of America, we see just a strong nationalism and pride for the country. And so throughout Ladies of Liberty, we see good examples of civic responsibility and service. And my personal favorite was with Abigail Adams. And even though there wasn't a place for women in politics, in her letters to her husband, she would postulate for women's education and so many other topics. And so my question for you guys is, in practical ways, what does civic responsibility and service mean to you?
Sure.
I would say it's everything from don't litter, hold doors for other people, treat people as you would want to be treated, those kind of basic things, to vote. Be educated about what the issues are when you go to vote so that you can make a good vote. And doing what you can with your personal talents to promote an environment where everyone is going to have opportunity for success. So civic responsibility covers a wide swath of things, from the pretty easy everyday to the much more difficult vein.
I would offer two things, particularly for the students, about being a citizen. One of the first is a responsibility that many of you will have very soon. One or two of you may have it right now, which is the responsibility to pick the leaders of our country. It's probably not any more important duty of a citizen to be engaged, to understand the issues, and pick leaders who are going to move our country forward. You'll all have a chance to do that. And it's amazing to me, around the world, this is something that those of us that have served in uniform, we have watched people go to vote in their countries at great personal risk because they were invested in their countries and they wanted their vote to make a difference. They wanted to be a part of their country, and they wanted to express their views on where the country ought to go. And in our country, there's sometimes elections, local elections, where 70% of the people don't vote. And sometimes a successful election is where 60 or 70% of the people do vote. And so when you think about it, that's a basic responsibility of being a citizen, to understand the issues and be informed, and then make a choice about what direction you want your community, your state, or your country to go in. The second responsibility, I think, is to make your community a little bit better. I think that's everybody's responsibility to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, I can't think of anything that I've accomplished in my life by myself that has been particularly meaningful or memorable. The things that I remember and the things I'll take away from my professional career are things that we accomplished as part of a team. And by ourselves, we're important, but not the most significant. And I think that when citizens look to their left and right, and they look for ways to make their community better. It can be something as simple, I think Ellyn referred to it, can be something as simple as making sure that the environment is clean. It can be something as simple as making sure that elderly people have access to getting their groceries, or being out, or being engaged, or having someone to speak to. It can be about mentoring younger children and making sure those young children have good role models and good examples and good mentors as they grow up. But to me, being a citizen is being engaged, being involved, having a stake in your local community and in your country, and then doing something personally for your community. And again, being part of something that's bigger than yourself, which not only is important as a citizen, but I think you'll find that to be the most rewarding thing you do in life.
Well, thank you, General and Mrs. Dunford, for allowing us to learn from these selections, and you really gave us insight for a sustainable future. And thanks for this opportunity. So, round of applause.
No, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Dr. Mary Keller and Mr. Jeff Valentine.
Good stuff.
You guys.
Hey, a couple of admin announcements here before we take a break. Want to remind everybody that out in the back corner back here, you'll have an opportunity to speak with Kayla from the Boys and Girls Club, or Military Child of the Year from Boys Club of America, if you'd like to speak with her. There are still some centerpieces on the table, and if you would like to make a small donation at the store, you can have the centerpiece and take it home. Would like everybody to, when you're using Amazon, to use Amazon Smile, because we get a small donation every time you make a purchase using Amazon Smile if you select MSEC as your charity of choice. So if you'll be back in here at 11:45 is our next panel session, and so please take a quick break. We have refreshments and snacks in the foyer. 11:45 back here. Thank you.